Get the crap out of my teeth. All right. So do you want me to just say this is the last episode of this season?
Sure.
Because Ted listened to the third one and he's like, I think this might need to be more than two. And there may be a couple of pieces that I'm not comfortable with that I want to cut out.
Okay.
And it was kind of interesting. So he's like, I don't have a reason for you. And I'm like, all right, so go back and timestamp where you're uncomfortable.
Okay.
And then we'll try and figure out if we can put words to why you're uncomfortable.
Mm-hmm.
So this may not be episode 7. It might be 9.
Just say last episode. And if we have other ideas, we'll squeeze them in before this. So this is just kind of staying the last episode.
Okay, that works. Okay. All right. All right. Welcome back to Boundary Spanners podcast, where my friend Abhi and I are talking about residential electrification. And this is the last episode of season 1. And in this, we wanted to do something different. We wanted to switch places, which I may utterly fail at. I'm kind of curious. This brings me back to my speech and debate days in high school, where I was fair to middling. I didn't lose every time, that's for sure, but I didn't win every time either. But I liked that structure where you were given a statement and then you had to do a pro and a con position. And you didn't know which position you were going to take until you got into the room. And then a judge got to listen to it. So we're going to attempt to steelman. I'm going to attempt to steelman policy from the government perspective, which anyone who knows me knows that it's very much against my normal position. And Abhi's going to try and steelman electrification from the blue collar and contractor side. So that's what we're going to try and do. We'll see just how this goes. So
can I jump in here, Nate, briefly?
Yeah, absolutely. Where would you like to begin?
It would have been trivial and easy for each of us to stay within our respective lanes. My background is predominantly policy work. Although I have some quote unquote blue collar background and work and training, and yours has been, predominantly frontline quote unquote blue collar work, and you have
manufacturing
or some experience in playing the policy realm. So it would have been relatively easy for each of us to kind of stay within our comfort zones and to pontificate. We haven't done that. Through this entire season, what we have done is, while staying within our relative realms of comfort and expertise, we have been trying to explore solutions at the boundaries between our two maps.
Yep.
What we're doing this episode is going a step further from that, and we're actually swapping homes. So there's this ridiculous TV show called Wife Swap back in the day. And I don't want to get into the details of that, but you can kind of figure out what it is just from the title. But there's also like an energy manager swap on YouTube. There's a show that the US Army and the US Navy do where they trade energy managers so that each goes into the other facility and tries to make it more sustainable and stuff like that. So anyways, long and short of this is that I'm going to cosplay or put myself in the mindset of a contractor and trying to make the best case from the contractor's perspective. And you, Nate, are going to put yourself in the heart and mind and soul of a policy person and try to make the best case for something from a policy wong's perspective as you understand it. And I'm going to do it as I understand it.
We're going to do our best. And I have to say, I'm actually pretty nervous about it. So
I am excited about this.
Well, I'm glad you're excited. So I'm so used to being on this one side of the argument that so we'll see if I can do it on the other side. Well, but so before we begin, I want to define one key thing that we are really trying very, very hard to avoid here. which is what we kind of accidentally have coined in previous episodes, the bell cliff. So picture a bell curve. And I mean, picture an up and to the right business curve. But a bell curve it's going to come up. You're going to start up the upward slope. It's going to tail off, and then it's going to fall off a cliff. The bell cliff. That is exactly what we want to avoid if we actually want to succeed at decarbonization. We can't do that behavior because like the solar industry has seen this again and again. They call it the solar coaster. So we're going to call this the bell cliff. So we want to avoid bell cliffs. So in anything that we are proposing and thinking about, we want to make sure that the upward slope of adoption can remain pretty steep and not taper off, and certainly not fall off a cliff. So the bell cliff is what we are trying to avoid here in thinking about this. Abhi, do you want to talk about a specific level? We wanted to do maybe like homeowner, city, state, and federal.
Yeah, I thought it might be interesting for us to zoom in to the church at the kitchen table, which is a reference to an earlier episode where we talked about the fragility of the relationship between the homeowner and the contractor when they're sitting down at the kitchen table, scoping out an electrification, potentially an electrification project. But invariably, sometimes because challenges that we talked about in earlier episodes, it ends up being a carbonization conversation because people lock in furnaces and stuff. So I thought it would be useful for us to kind of zoom into the church at the kitchen table, and then zoom out at each level of governance and geography. So what I mean by that is, you start at the kitchen table between the homeowner and the contractor. What can a homeowner do? Some things that homeowners can do to better support the electrification industry, better support contractors that are out there taking significant risk to their business models by trying to add electrification and decarbonization to their already large portfolio of work and stuff like that. And then zoom out to some recommendations that we have for what cities and municipalities and local governments can do, and more importantly, what they shouldn't be doing that they're already doing now. Zoom one level out, talk about the state level, what policy, state level policies, provincial or state, yeah. And then again, zooming out at the national level, some approaches that you and I, so we can talk about. And again, this is not going to be an exhaustive list. In season 2, when we have a season 2, we can spend 1 or 2 episodes at each of these levels of Zoom. Right now, we're just going to bounce ideas back and forth, try to steelman each other, try to identify what works, what wouldn't work, and then try to come up with a list of ideas and calls to action for our listeners who might be embedded at each of these different levels. Certainly, most people are homeowners or have the potential of being actively involved at that church at the kitchen table. If you're a contractor or a homeowner, just based on our audience, I know a significant chunk of them have the ability to make a informed decision-making at the municipal level or at the state or the national level. So this is calls to action to individuals who might be listening to this and on how they can better support residential decarbonization and contractors that are involved in residential decarbonization.
Yep. Well, so we're going to start at the homeowner level, and that probably actually won't hardly have the policy piece. To me, there's 2 different key pieces at that level. One is to avoid as much as possible the 85% emergency replacement problem that we've talked about
in a previous episode.
Yep, in a previous episode. And the best way to do that would be to engage an HVAC contractor and get a maintenance plan from them. Because what you want is someone to touch the system once a year, get eyeballs on it. There's a wonderful tool out there that everyone should be aware of. It's an app called Measure Quick. And what it does is it just in the past few years, Bluetooth probes, so Bluetooth tools to test HVAC equipment have become common. It's only the last 4 or 5 years that's become a thing. And so Measure Quick is a tool that sucks the data from all those in through Bluetooth and then puts it through a bunch of algorithms and then will tell you when something's wrong or not. And so that's really helpful to understand the health of your HVAC system. So asking for a Measure Quick report as part of a maintenance plan is going to help you understand how much life you have left in your system, so that when it comes time, you can make a plan. Because they have finite lives. Everything really does. So if you can understand, all right, we're probably 3 years out from replacement, that's the kind of time frame that you want to make a plan, so that when it does die, you'd be like, call them up. Hey, Jim, furnace just died. Ready to execute that plan. When can we get it done? And do you have some space heaters I can borrow to get us through in the meantime? Something along those lines. So maintenance is key. And then the other key is to get educated from a homeowner perspective. So you want to understand what electrification looks like, what the steps are, and then begin making that plan. Because the HVAC's the biggest and the hardest piece, particularly in cold climates. But doing that requires getting educated, and then you have to go find that contractor. And so we're working on a system right now for just that, so that you can call a supply house, which is who sells the equipment to the contractors. And if you call them and you ask, hey, who buys a whole bunch of this kind of equipment? If a contractor is already buying the type of equipment that you want to install, they're not going to fight you tooth and nail. So you just reduce the level of challenge that you have by quite a bit. I mean, if you think about like dating someone to marry them, you're starting on the 4th date. Like, you've met the parents, you've done a couple of movies, you've done a couple of dinners. A whole lot of those barriers are down. There's still plenty more barriers. You're not hitched yet, but at least you've reduced a lot of those barriers. And particularly if we can begin to create a list of contractors in both the US and Canada that are open to electrification, that's going to help make this process a lot easier. And that's a relatively simple thing. Everyone can put 20 or 30 minutes into that and work.
Is there no national or state level database of contractors right now? Because I know a lot of provinces do this sort of, like, they call it asset mapping, right? So asset mapping for renewables, asset mapping for wind, asset mapping for solar. Yep. Is not just tangible physical assets, like where is the wind towers and stuff, but where are the companies that are manufacturing wind turbines, or installers that are ready to go put solar on the roof. So just identifying within your own province or your community the assets that you would need for decarbonization or electrification. So is there no, to the best of your knowledge, there's no national database of contractors ready to do residential decarbonization? Is that right?
Yeah, I'm not aware of anything. I know of some individual efforts in various places, like the Bay Area has 1 or 2 different programs that they're working on. But there's, to my knowledge, there's nothing national.
And what you're proposing is a way through which individuals can use you have a process through which individuals can kind of pre-qualify or vet contractors that have more chops, either be skills or technical expertise in being able to do decarbonization, by the fact that they are already connecting with supply houses to buy equipment that meets the kind of goals that I have, which is to decarbonize, for example. And then in doing so, you're also, and I think you said you're collecting this data through a Google form or something. So So as a homeowner, not only do you now have a process through which you can pre-qualify contractors so that they are ready to do decarbonization when you're ready with the plan for it. And then by sharing that information with you, you are putting together a national, a publicly available, I'm assuming, national list or map of
That's
of contractors that are ready to decarbonize. Fantastic. Okay.
So that's the homeowner side. Get yourself educated so that you understand what it is, reduce your fears, understand what the options are, make a plan, get a maintenance contract so that you have an existing relationship with a contractor. But then you have to find a contractor, which is its own challenge right now. So there's a great deal of boots on the ground challenges at the moment to go through. So if you're looking to do this, you're on the early side, you're an early adopter, you're going to have to do more work and you're going to have to pay more. Sorry. Welcome to being an early adopter. It just is. So, but in any case, that's the homeowner level. Get educated, get a plan, get a maintenance contract.
And what about the contractor level? If you're a contractor out there who is interested in developing a business model around electrifying homes, what can they do?
Again, that's a lot of education. And I mean, I'm trying to avoid blatantly promoting HVAC 2.0, but this is one of those moments. The key thing as a contractor is moving to high-end equipment carries a lot of risk, and high-end equipment is best used to decarbonize, particularly in cold climates. You need to be playing with cold climate heat pumps to be able to decarbonize, and those are not the bottom end of the line. Those are right at the top. So you need to be comfortable with using those technologies. And so if you're going to use them, particularly in a colder climate again, you need to know what the load of that house is so that you don't misapply the equipment. You don't put it in on a duct system. You can't put a 4-ton system on a system that will only handle 2.5 tons of airflow. You're going to break that system quickly, and then you're going to end up with an upset client. But if you aren't careful, you could run very high bills as well. So there's a great deal of risk to reduce as a contractor. And so the best way in our experience, because we built a system around this, is to step by step through diagnostics and understanding what people are trying to do, peel the onion back so that you can land on one specific piece of equipment that is likely to fix what the client wants fixed, and also deal with what the weaknesses of that house are, what the needs of it are, and then also hopefully stay within a budget. But doing that, it's incredibly unsexy, and my partner's been saying this for years. The solution to this problem is sales process. It sounds so unsexy. We don't need a new technology, we don't need new people. It is just a slightly different way of doing things.
You don't need to go back to school to learn a whole new way of doing HVAC.
No.
You need a process to wrap around all these things around that you can profitably and reliably make a rapid business around.
Correct. Yeah. And so that's something also a key point. I don't know that can be done top down. So if someone else sells a project and then subs it, I don't know that that's likely to be successful at scale.
Can you expand on that?
Yes. So, I mean, for starters, I can start with my own personal experience being an energy auditor and developing this process. If I let off at any point at a project, so the process we developed, it's basically an energy auditor on steroids. So I would show up at the house and I'd figure out what people were trying to solve, find out how leaky their house was, run a load calculation, create a plan. And these were the advanced plans where there was a lot of shell work, lots of insulation and air sealing usually. And then we would sit down, decide what we were actually going to do. And who was responsible for each one of those action items. And then we'd go get bids and see if the bids came in within the budget. And if sometimes we could do more, sometimes we had to do less, whatever that might look like. And then I would ride herd watching the work get done. And then when it was done, I would come back to do final air sealing and final tweaks to the HVAC. And then I would follow up with the customer afterwards to see how well it worked. And if I let off on any single one of those points, the projects tended to fail. And at the end of my contracting company, I was just burned out. And my crew actually blew up on me. One day I get a phone call, "We're not working together anymore." I'm like, "What do you mean we're not working together anymore?" And so that was an interesting thing to work my way through, but I moved to subcontracting. But like the one where I decided to just kill it, I went on a project, stopped by, and I asked the foreman, is this ready to blow? Are we ready to blow insulation? Because everything's been air sealed, and I had specified what I wanted air sealed in particular. And he's like, yep, it's all good. I'm like, okay, fine. I'm going to crawl in and go look. They hadn't done any of the air sealing. They were about to blow it, literally and figuratively. And so that is the danger when you're subcontracting and there aren't very high levels of accountability attached to it. So that's my fear of models that are looking to create and design a job and then sell it. I mean, we've seen that to a degree. Next Step Living failed doing that. They got 100 million in VC and then failed. So I don't know that there's any way to do decarbonization top down. I think it has to be done bottom up. The decision making needs to be at the edges, not at the center. And that's going to be really, really tricky to do. So, I mean, I'm just kind of peeling back how we ended up on the path that we're on, creating a process for HVAC contractors to do this sort of thing. But so now I'm on the wrong side. Now I need to take the policy side.
So if I'm understanding you correctly, what you're saying is that policy might bring about strange bedfellows or strange partnerships that are kludged together to respond to a particular initiative or particular response to a particular program. But the strength of them staying together might be tested when only like an HVAC contractor is held responsible and holds the liability for all the sub pieces of this. So an HVAC contractor coming together with like an insulation person, there's challenges there's very limited circumstances under which they would work together. And if they're clutched together because of a certain program, then chances are that based on how the liability of all this rolls out there. So that's a significant problem in just trades in general, right? Subcontracting and dealing with the liability and that sort of thing. And what you're saying instead is if HVAC contractors were to build these relationships from the ground up themselves naturally, because they saw that as an evolution of their own business model, then the chances of an arrangement like this, either through in-house or through some sort of partnership, is stronger because the fundamentals of the business relationship is predicated on trust and things like that, and not because of a short-term program or funding arrangement.
Yes. Yeah. We're avoiding the business model whiplash, like we were talking about, as one of the four horsemen of the HVAC ellipse.
So let's summarize the calls to action at the church at the kitchen table. So if you're a homeowner, get a plan, start a relationship with an HVAC contractor, learn more about decarbonizing your own home. So I would recommend, you're too shy to do this perhaps, but I would recommend if you're a homeowner to take Nate's Electrify Everything course. It's freely available right now. It's the soup to nuts, he calls it, of everything you need to know if you're a homeowner on electrifying your home. And I would add one more thing to these three things that you brought up earlier, Nate, is that if you are doing this on your own, or if you've successfully decarbonized your home, then I would encourage you to talk about it more openly, write a blog about it, talk to your friends and neighbors about it, have them show, be a net promoter, like a 9 or 10 net promoter, which means I hate, this term has multiple meanings, but to evangelize on behalf of something that you've done and speak more proudly. And there's all this research about, a significant percentage of people who buy an electric vehicle buy because they test drove one of their friends' electric vehicles and stuff like that. So
I call that advocating apolitically, so you can get a nice alliteration. Advocate apolitically. So don't be obnoxious about it. But
don't be a fanboy. Don't be a stan.
Yeah. Don't be obnoxious. But I mean, if you get an induction hot plate or an induction stove and you like the experience, have friends over and cook dinner, and have them help. Yeah, you can do the classic. It's kind of a gimmicky trick, but you take a paper towel and you put it on the stove, and then you put the pan on top of that, and it won't burn the paper towel. You
And
can't
then
do that
while still
otherwise.
searing a steak.
100%. Yeah, it's not a problem. You're using magnetism, not raw heat. And so push people to drive your electric car.
Mhm.
Like that can be a good thing. That's
So to be an apolitical advocate within your tight knit circle of friends and family,
yes.
and for a contractor, without getting into specifics of HVAC 2.0, would be to try to find a way of organically develop incorporating. Can you expand on that? What can the contractors do?
Well, the key thing there is to educate clients as early as possible so that you can avoid, the whole cheap paint problem that I've talked about a few times already. It As a homeowner, I didn't understand that there were different kinds of HVAC until I started digging into the HVAC world about 5 years ago. So if you don't understand those things, you're just like, oh, HVAC is HVAC is HVAC. So if you go to your homeowner clients and you start pushing at all on higher end equipment, they're going to push back. But if you can educate them up front, with the HVAC 101, like anybody can go download that. You can use it freely. You don't have to, there's no attribution, there's no payment, there's no nothing. So I am not afraid to put that one out there. That compares the HVAC in a house to the HVAC in a car, and the house comes out wanting. And once people understand that, you get comments like we got recently. Jeff Howard, one of his clients, said, "Don't you dare talk to me anything other than that 19 SEER, piece of awesomeness right there." And so that's what we want. But if you can educate people up front and de-commoditize as you go, without doing it in a salesy way, that's a good thing. So go download HVAC 101 and try it in different ways. People have been trying it in different ways and having success. So
Got it. So let's zoom out now to one
yes.
scale higher. At the local municipality, city level,
Mm-hmm.
let me put this to you, policymaker Nate. What is a good role for a local? Because I know, we've seen around America and Canada, a lot of local municipalities are coming up with their local energy plans, the community energy plans, and they have, 2050 decarbonized by 2050 goals and things like that. A lot of ambition, a lot of interest. What are some ways in which they can channel that in ways that would support these things that we're talking about, which is supporting a growing industry of HVAC professional, or let me step back, actually, supporting, so that they don't do things like the Bell
Cliff.
And so let me give you an entry point into this. We just talked about, I think one of the threads that came out in the earlier kitchen table level was making a plan and staying informed for a homeowner. Do you see a role that cities can play in helping homeowners achieve these two things?
Yes, I really do. So I'll start this by setting my mindset in looking at policy, which is part of why I struggle with it. So now I'm policymaker Nate. But in anything that you're planning to do, think about what would happen if you 1000x'd this program, because the odds are that's what you're going to be looking at. So like if you can build a program to get the first 0.1%, that's great and all, but you're just appealing to the ooh shiny crowd at that point, the very early people. So we want to build programs that we could scale up and have it actually hang in there. So education would be a really key piece of that. Like putting something on a website that's free and infinitely scalable at zero cost. So having some way to educate both homeowners and contractors, because again, as a policymaker, as much as I want to have my own goals. I need to sublimate my goals to that of the church at the kitchen table. If we're going to succeed and avoid the bell cliff. That's the whole game here, is how do I avoid the bell cliff? So if we could educate homeowners and contractors, that would be wonderful. Perhaps we could set up a community of practice where people get together physically to talk about things. And I mean, if a city has meeting space, that's pretty low cost. And I mean, is it 1,000x scalable? Probably not, but it's probably 10x. So that may not be a bad thing to look at. And I mean, Pittsburgh is known as a really green city. And I find it kind of interesting because in my experience, it's usually not. But they've at least marketed it well as that. One of my friends recently built a house and he wanted to do a passive house or a near passive house, and he couldn't find a builder to actually do it. So he ended up doing it modular instead, which I thought was interesting. But you can begin to influence how people think. I mean, it is amazing. Like, I've been to a number of big cities and you see these posters that you read them and you're like, oh, that's interesting. And it begins to shift your mindset. So like riding the subway, riding the tube, whatever it might be, walking around, seeing various things. What was it? It was an ad for natural gas utility back in Germany years ago when natural gas was still considered like kind of the next step, the bridge. And this would only happen in Europe. It wouldn't happen in the US because we're too conservative. But it was a picture of a woman from behind, nude, with a green plume of gas coming out of her butt. And like that got my attention. Like, what the heck is this? And so I stopped to read the bottom, which was extremely fine print, to see what it was for. So there's ways that we could use advertising and marketing to begin to shift mindsets for this. So that to me would be some things. It's heavily education and then facilitating homeowners and contractors to learn more and get together more. But one important point there, it probably needs to be wrapped around some sort of system, because just saying you want something to do it without providing a really explicit path to getting there tends to fail. I mean, we're watching this as we're trying to develop this tool for a nationwide list of contractors that are electrification friendly. I'm on the second iteration of that form and it's failing. So we're working on the third iteration to try and figure out what it is. If you don't give a very explicit process for people to follow, it's tough to actually get things to work.
So let me speak as a contractor.
Okay.
And I, as a contractor, have occasionally been invited by a city to participate in a workshop. And I go there, they have stale coffee and old donuts. And then they bring in some mucky muck called House Whisperer or something from Ohio.
Yeah.
And he's out there and he's selling things. He's talking about some good things, but I've got a business to run. You know, I've got clients to take care of. I've got young, apprentice to mentor. I've got sales to close. I've got to do all of these things.
Yeah.
So I feel like oftentimes when cities tell me I should be doing something, when I know that the people that are in the room that are calling this meeting together don't know my life, don't know my business models, and are now asking me for the gift of my time and then telling me what I should rather be doing with my business without giving me a clear sense that they actually do get it, like at a tacit level, understand my business and care about the success of my business, but that just have their own goals that they have to meet. I don't eat if I don't close these sales. My family doesn't eat.
Yep.
Whereas when I'm in rooms with some of these people, sometimes I feel like, why should I change what I'm doing so that they can get to the goals that they have written to. Because if we don't get to those goals, if I don't get to my goals, I know that my family is not eating. I employ 10 people, they're not eating.
Yep.
But if we don't get to the 2050 goals, do the people that have called this meeting, do they still get to eat until 2050? Because I feel like they do. And so I feel like I have more skin in the game than they do. And so to me, I find that when I'm called and asked to do certain things, I find that very challenging. What I would prefer, what I really want to know, is to get together with other HVAC owners in my town, and just because I want to know there's things I don't know. I'm really curious about a lot of things that I've been doing my business a certain way for a certain number of years, and I want to know if there's what others are doing. If there's ways, I don't want to get. I mean, yes, we're all competing, but we also all care about our industry together. So I want to get together with people like myself who understand my business, who understand what makes me tick and what makes me work, and then together I want to see if I can get a piece of that pie. Because I know.
Well, do you have an abundance mindset as a contractor? There's always more work out there for everyone.
There is always more work out there. I mean, it's honestly, I'm struggling now to hire people to close the calls that I'm getting right now.
And get the stuff installed. Yeah.
I always believe that if you're good at what you do, there's always good work to be done, right? I'm not worried about someone coming scoping me out, but I don't have enough, I don't know why am I going to this training meeting? Why can't I, you know what I mean?
How would you feel if someone from the city came and rode in your truck for the day?
Man, I would love that. I want to, because there's so much. I would really like that a lot, because I think they would learn a little bit more about what my, like how I close jobs, what homeowners ask me, and
what you have to
and
fix.
I feel I'd also like to learn more about how they see it, because maybe there's something that I'm missing. Maybe there's ways that I could be doing this differently. I'm open to it. I just don't.
Would breaking bread together possibly help too?
Yeah, let's do a cookout on an electric stovetop. Here's something else, and this is one thing I don't have time for that I wish someone else could help me with, which is that I can't sell things that people don't want. I'm not in the business. I don't want to go into a homeowner's home and tell them what they should be doing with their money, because I don't want to hold the responsibility for something that they didn't sign up for. So
would you like me to avoid the word should as a city official? You should do this.
Yeah, that would be a good start. But what I think maybe if someone out there was telling homeowners that they should be getting these maintenance contracts, they should be paying more attention to when their HVAC systems are failing. Maybe that they already have some kind of a plan, that so when I show up, they know exactly what equipment they want. They are interested in solving the problem just as much as, and they're asking me for my expertise and not just like trying to get the cheapest quote from someone else. So I want to go in. I would love to go into a house where a homeowner is like, look, I have some ideas. I have ideas. Many of them are goofy, but I want to try. Can you help me with this? I'll pay you for your time. And I'll sit there and I'll tell them based on my expertise what, how they can go about with this project. But it's not, I don't have the time nor the ability to create a consumer demand for decarbonization. I'd like someone else to play that role, so that when I show up there with my products, my decarbonization products, homeowners are ready to work with me on this. I don't want to face an uphill battle every time to try to convince someone to decarbonize, because time is money. And I have I have a limited crew, and I have limited time. I have limited businesses to close. And so if people had a plan and they wanted to decarbonize, and I'd show up there and I'll help them with it. But until then, it's easier for me to make my margins on going and replacing systems like for like.
Yep. So a question for you there, and I'm sorry, for a moment, I'm putting my contractor hat back on. Do most people actually care about decarbonization? So as a city, should I educate differently than straight decarb?
my experience has been as a contractor, my experience has been that people just want the quickest, fastest thing they can get in, because I mean, a lot of people do say they care about decarbonization, and people make small efforts in their life to reduce their footprint and all that. But when it comes to HVAC decision, because people are making 85% of people are making that decision under duress. At that point in time, they just care about getting that problem fixed, checking that box, and getting it done.
Okay.
So,
Well, so there's probably one other big thing as a city that I could help with then, potentially, because this could be done at really any of the three levels of government, being city, state, provincial, and then federal. What if we paid to have supply houses only stock heat pumps, so that at least we were looking at a heat pump install under duress?
So, I mean, if I'm going in to replace an air conditioner that's broken, and all I had at my disposal was a heat pump, then functionally it's really no different, right? So that way the decision is not, it's not a decision point for the homeowner. I don't need to convince them to put in a heat pump. I'm going in there to deal with their cooling problem. And so what I am a little worried about is if I need to train my guys and girls more differently, so to put in a heat pump. Many of them are used to just taking an air conditioning, putting new air conditioning in. And so I'm a little concerned about that. And I don't know how to hook a system up so that it also does heating too. That might be something that I'm a little concerned about. But what it does do, at least, is it doesn't, I don't have to convince the homeowner to put a heat pump. It just becomes a heat pump by default. As long as I can still maintain the same closing ratios, maintain the same margins, maintain the same growth, without losing time on training my guys and girls to do things differently, it doesn't really affect my life one way or the other. It might actually make it easier.
So what if we as a city sponsored some technical training on what's different between an air conditioner and a heat pump at the supply houses?
Right now, the only training my team can get is stuff that comes through the manufacturers themselves. I would love to send my team out to just somewhere local, somewhere they can learn how to do this differently.
Okay,
we
so
can spend
that
an
would be
evening
one
or two
hurdle.
and pay them some overtime. Yeah, do it.
Okay. It that kind of cracks me up, because that's actually a new thought in my mind. Not we want to be careful to keep training purely technical, because it's usually more of a sales problem than it is a technical problem. But there still is a technical problem, so we don't want to ignore that piece of this.
Yeah, and putting on my policy hat again. Each of us is more comfortable with our original hat on. So, once in a while we'll slip back to our on. So speaking as a policy person, and you can respond, Nate, as a contractor. Speaking as a policy person, I would love to see a city somewhere be creative about a public awareness campaign around what's your blower door number. Getting people to share and brag about what their blower door number is. Yeah. And have a leaderboard of some sort so that people can.
And why does that matter, by the way? Because I don't know that we've discussed that yet.
You tell me.
I was looking forward to you taking that one. It's the blower door is a very good measure of the leakage of a house. And once you get to nominal R values, so somewhere between 10 and 20, or R10, R20, once you get beyond that, additional R value tends to not matter as much as reducing air leakage in a house. And when it gets really cold, a leaky house will leak really quickly. It acts like a giant smokestack. So if you can, another way to look at it is it's like a straw. So if you take a straw and you put your thumb over it and put it in a drink, it won't let anything in until you let your thumb off. And then if you put your thumb back on and you pull it out, it will, the water or the drink will stay in it. But as soon as you start poking holes in that straw, that whole thing goes out the window. And then if you don't have your thumb on the top or bottom of the straw, it just allows fluid to go straight through it. And similar things happen with a house. The leaky they are, the more it acts like a leaky straw, or a leaky straw that doesn't have a thumb on the top and bottom. Where the tighter the house we can get it, the better. So yeah, that's one piece of it. So yeah, a blower door registry would be good. Although I hesitate from the contractor side on that to a large degree, because that is something that costs money house by house. So you can have a registry for it, like play referee, but I don't know that I would want to mandate that, because that's going to go cost a bunch of people money. So just to be
Sure.
clear,
And I don't know that cities do have the levers either to mandate
mhm.
I guess it depends on the province again, but to mandate blower doors, but to have but again, we're still talking in the realm of education and public awareness, right?
Yes,
A public
yes,
awareness
exactly.
campaign, getting people to brag about, talking about why blower doors are important.
Mhm.
When
That
people
would
are
be good.
buying a home, encouraging them to think more deeply about, because when you buy a home, we find oftentimes people they don't even ask for utility bills.
No.
And if they don't experience comfort in the home, it takes a
Yeah.
whole year for you to live in a house before you realize that some of your doors are leaky and some of your windows are drafty.
I've asked 4 times for the utility bills on this house, and I don't have them yet. Just because I want to confirm my load calc.
Yep.
But I don't know that I'm going to get them.
So a public awareness campaign around blower door numbers or utility numbers
Mhm.
on a house before when people buy or sell would be good. Again, we're not talking about regulations. We're not talking about any of this. We're still sticking within that narrow lane of
Just
informing
education.
and education.
Yep.
Get an awareness campaign around getting people to have a HVAC replacement plan or a furnace replacement plan.
Mhm.
Hey, what's your plan this winter? Do you have a plan if your furnace breaks?
Mhm.
And just getting people on thinking about a plan, so that we don't get into the situation where we're creating this incentive for the race to the bottom, cheapest quote, quickest install. I think those would be rolled. And again, when I say a city, I'm not talking only about municipal officials and municipal
Mhm.
government, talking
Okay.
about institutions at the local level. So your local,
Huh.
so your
Library.
local advocacy group, local library. I
Mhm.
mean, I don't know if that I mean, putting my contractor hat back on, I don't know that I want to spend $6,000 in buying a blower door equipment, but I'd like to go test it out for a day or two. If maybe my local library had it, my local utility had it, my local community college had it, that I can borrow, so my team can go test it out and get familiar with it.
Mhm. No, I definitely love that idea. Having local access to a blower door for either lending or rental
Yeah,
would be a very nice piece of this, because when it comes to cold climate decarbonization, if a house is leaky, you really can't slam a heat pump in that. And looking at a house, you can have an idea of where it might be. But I mean, I remember a house that I tested years ago. It was a Cape Cod, which are typically the leakiest variety, a 1.5 story house that had sloped ceilings on the second floor. And the number was only like 2,000, and I was expecting it to be 6. And I was like, wait a minute, what's going on here? And I'm like, maybe I set something up wrong. What's going on? I pulled the thing down, put it back up, got the same number. I'm like, I have no idea why your house is kind of tight, but it's kind of tight. It makes no sense. I've never seen this before. Um, and the moral of the story is, unless you test, you're guessing when it comes to that. And since air leakage has such a huge influence on the usage and the load of a house, you need to understand that up front to understand if it's a good electrification candidate as it stands, or if it needs some modifications, or if it needs a lot of modifications. So yeah, important piece.
gotcha.
Okay. Well, you want to move to state and provincial?
One last
One more?
thing.
Okay.
What if a local organization, advocacy group, environmental organization had some kind of metrics on contractors that were doing electrification, a leaderboard of some sort?
Mm-hmm.
And maybe, I know that cities around the country, sometimes they give out these annual awards, like local volunteer award, local business award. Maybe Chamber of Commerce can start giving out awards to contractors that have electrified the most homes. Which contractor has done the biggest, not static pressure drop, sorry, biggest, blower door number drop between before and after. I don't know. I mean, I'm just guessing. So there's a way of building
would be a wonderful thing. Yeah.
Competition, building community around decarbonization, encouraging people, creating spaces where contractors can meet prospective homeowners can meet skilled contractors. All of this can happen at the local scale, that institutions that are local, community colleges, libraries, cities, all of these institutions have a strong role to play in that piece.
And that's an important point. This is really not cities that we're talking about specifically. They're one of several different.
The local scale.
Local
you're
scale.
Zooming in. You're like a bird, flying over, and you're looking at the city and all the institutions and entities that come with it. We're calling for a greater sense of responsibility from these institutions and playing a role in the problems that we've identified in this in this podcast so far. So now let's zoom out to the state level.
So there's at the state level, there is an incredibly critical 1000x opportunity.
Okay.
And that is to publish energy use at resale.
Okay. Can you expand on that?
Yes. So when you go in to buy a house, you really have no idea what its operation costs are going to be. And they do vary quite a bit. So some of it is driven by heating and cooling. Some of it's driven by the occupants, although the occupant drivenness is reducing quite a bit, because like lighting used to be a big deal, and now we're heavily LEDs, which uses 90% less energy. If you run a heat pump water heater, like having someone there for water heat only costs an extra $1 or $2 a month. So it's almost immeasurable at that point. It's in noise territory. So the occupants piece is reducing as far as that matters. So we're largely looking at the heating and cooling piece. So if say one house costs $50 a month to operate, and a nearly identical one, I mean, it could be the same neighborhood across the street, but it's nearly identical, and it costs $100 a month to operate. Should that cost difference over 30 years, that's going to be a decent chunk of change. I mean, we're talking $600 a year times 30, whatever that ends up being, $18,000 over 30 years. Should that cheaper to operate house be worth some portion of that $18,000 extra if you could see that difference? And I would definitely argue that it would. And I mean, banks would too. Banks value things heavily on cash flow. Like if you walk in to get a mortgage and you're a W-2 employee, well, it's the American term, but you're an employee who gets regular paychecks. So you show them what you earned with whatever government form it is from last year. When you show up with that and your significant others earning things, and then you show them what your car payment is and your house payment is, or whatever it is, they look at all those cash flows and they say, all right, we will lend you this much per month, which translates to this number of dollars of house you can buy. Excuse me. And so if you go to multiple banks, your pre-approval letter is probably going to be within 10%. So you almost have a number stamped on your forehead of what you can borrow based on your earnings. And that all goes back to cash flows, is what that goes back to. So utility rates are a cash flow. It's not a gigantic one, but it is a cash flow. So if banks could actually see that, potentially that house that costs less to operate would be worth more, because the banks would see that it costs less to run. But the only way for that to actually be able to connect all the way through is for that data to be publicly available or easily available, so that you can compare. I mean, it's how do you figure out home values? It's all comps. Our last house was a real pain in the tuchus because it was built in 1835 and it was nicely updated, but there were no comps like in the whole county. because it was such an old house. There was nothing anywhere close. So we're like, look, this lives and acts like a house that was built in maybe the 50s, not 1835. And so that was really problematic, just finding a comp for that. So we probably could have sold that house for more if it had been, say, 50 years newer, because there would have been comps in the late 1800s. So what we need are comps for energy, because it doesn't really matter. Like even comparing two houses doesn't really matter that much. It's how do those two houses compare to the average of other houses similar? Because that's how things work. You're comparing to the average and how much above or below what the average is it. So one thing that states and provinces could do would be, and it's, I hate saying mandate. My contractor hat on for a moment. I don't like saying mandate because it causes so many problems. But if there was a way to, at resale, publish what the electricity usage per year is and what the gas or oil or propane usage per year is, you can take those, make whatever cost assumptions you want on the utility costs, and then also make whatever net present value assumptions you want to make. Are we looking at 10-year net present? Are we looking at 30? What percentage are we looking at? There's all these things that's not for the government to decide. This is just, let's put the numbers out there and let people see it, and then let the market decide what that's worth.
Right.
And by doing that, you're going to be able to see the houses that are not good electrification candidates. But if someone goes and electrifies their house, they can probably get some of that upgrade cost back if they sell it.
Right. That's what I wanted to ask you, is that, or to add to what you said. So yes, on one hand, the actual dollars and cents matter, right? So $18,000 over the period of 30 years, it is money, but it's end of the day, I'm again, playing the devil's advocate here. If your house is going to appreciate 3-4 times, 5 times, maybe even by the end of 30 years, $18,000 is maybe chump change, right? This is what I hear from families now who are in the market for buying new houses. Like you're spending 800, I mean, here in Canada, especially urban Canada, you're spending $800,000 on a startup home. Like, do you care if you spend extra $100 a month on electricity? So,
yeah.
But the important thing here is that it's not only that it is operational cost, which is true, which some people may feel is not significant. What is significant, however, is the fact that right now, when people do invest in more energy efficient HVAC systems or tightening the building envelope in their home and things like that, and reduce their operation costs, when they sell it, that investment is not reflected.
Correct.
It's not reflected because most people don't know or don't look at those numbers, and there's no way of capturing that information because
it's invisible.
It's invisible and it's expected. Oh, does it have heat? Does it not have heat? It's binary.
Yes.
And the fact that it's a high efficient system and there's no way that you can articulate and that information is just lost like tears in rain. And what you want to do instead is find a way of capturing that information so that then if people don't want to make a decision based on that, then it is what it is, but at least they still have access to that information. And so when people are doing the right things in investing in their homes and investing in lowering the lowering the carbon or lowering the energy use or actually decarbonizing their home, that information is captured somehow in a way that is quantifiable. And that's also a part of the sales process so that they have access to that. Right.
So there's 2 points I want to tack on to this. So the first one is, do you think you could argue that a house that generally uses substantially less energy is in better shape or possibly has had better care?
That's what I wanted to ask you, actually. So my instinct is to say, and I'm, bear in mind, I don't have a lot of insight about houses specifically, but my insight compared to you, but my instinct is to say that if I looked at two houses in roughly the same neighborhood, roughly the same year of build, and one of them had $500 in utility bills every month, the other had $100, my brain would think that the $500 a month utility bill house would also have comfort issues.
Yep.
Would also have moisture issues.
Moisture issues. Yeah.
Right. Moisture issues would probably be
Deferred
drafty and
maintenance
leaky.
issues.
Right. Because that's telling me something, but I'm not exactly sure what, but there's some instinct, like some lizard part of my brain that says,
like, well, that smells funny. I mean, I've bought a lot of cars through the years. And so I can look at the pictures of a car online. I mean, the pictures always look better than reality. That's how it works. You look at houses and cars, the pictures are always better than reality. So if you look at a picture and you're like, that thing looks like it was beat. When you get there, like, oh, yep, sure enough, it was beat. And so I've developed a gut instinct looking at that sort of thing. And like, there's been a couple cars. My wife's like, let's go look at this one. I'm like, look at this, look at this. This was owned by a kid and it was not taken care of. We don't want that car. Because who gets to work on that if we buy it and it breaks? I don't want to do that work anymore. Oil and brakes, that's all I have any interest in doing these days. So energy can be the same way. It's a canary in a coal mine, if you will. So a friend of mine went looking for houses in Rochester, New York, and found this little ranch that he liked. It was 1,400 square feet. And he asked for the utility bills, and there were $400 a month. It didn't have a pool, because pools can drive all kinds of crazy stuff. Pool pumps and heating and cooling pools are just really energy intensive. But he's like, something's wrong. And he pushed it off the table just for that reason. So this is a piece of that puzzle. Now, the second point I wanted to make is, with half of the energy use or natural gas use in the U.S. happening in 9 states, if you look at the property values in those 9 states, it's basically the Midwest. It's Ohio, Indiana, Illinois, it's Pennsylvania, Michigan, and I think Minnesota was in there. And then there were 2, like Pennsylvania is actually largely climate zone 4. So it's not quite as cold, but lots of population, lots of gas, and then Missouri. And I'm probably missing one, but you get the idea. It's the Midwest, basically, that we're looking at. And if you look at the resale values and the home values in those states, they're very much on the low side. Minnesota is a big exception. Minnesota has crazy house prices. I don't know why you want to pay a fortune to freeze your butt off, but you know what? Whatever, knock yourself out. But if we can create $5, $10, $20, $30,000 worth of value in a housing market, like the house that I sold, the 1835 house, we sold that for $200,000. It was 2,200 square feet with 700 square feet of finished basements, a nice garage. It was on a full acre. Everything was basically primo. I mean, it was a really, really nice older home. That home, if I just moved it 10 miles to the town that I went to high school in, which is a very high value town, it would have been worth 600,000. If I put it in LA, it would have been 3 million, probably actually 4 or 5. So I'm just trying to illustrate the cost difference. So in looking at that house, to decarbonize that house the way I wanted to do it was going to be about 150,000. I sold it for 200. So unfortunately, the best decision for that house, because the technology, a direct replacement for a high temperature boiler, that's the only technology we don't have currently for decarbonization. And I wanted to say that I live in an electric house sooner than that. So my only realistic option without destroying my retirement fund was to sell the house and buy something else. And just know that the tech is coming for what that house needs, but it needs a direct drop-in replacement. I know what the load on that house is. It needs a 5-ton heat pump. That would do the trick. 60,000 BTUs, it could get it done. But that's not a high value home. So getting someone to spend $30,000 or $40,000 on a home like that and then not get it back at resale, because that home sold for $226,000 in 2005. The value of that home has actually gone down over time. There was a crazy spike, and then it came down, and then it's come back up again, but it's still not even back to the peak where it was. So low housing values are a thing in most of the markets that we're looking to decarbonize. So relatively small value differences are likely to matter, would be
Got
my
it.
argument. And
Yeah.
so since we're talking state levels, if we can get those 9 states to do this sort of thing, and like Chicago proper, they actually do require publishing energy use at resale for homes. And they saw a market bump at the time. It was about $4,000. Didn't even matter what the numbers were because they didn't have enough to compare. It was just by taking the invisible and making it visible, it reduced the risk in a transaction and the value went up.
So that's what I wanted to point out / ask you, which is, if I'm house shopping this time of the year, it's what, August 2021, and I live in Canada, right? Not too much to the north. Actually, I'm the same latitude as Saginaw in Michigan, or little over Detroit. Still cold in the winters, can be. And if I'm going and looking at a house today, like when I'm looking at a house to buy, this is like one of the biggest investment of my life.
Yep.
I spend a few hours inside, and I have no idea of how this house is going to behave in the winter. So I think aren't energy use numbers, especially when you look at like energy use in the winters, shouldn't that tell you something about how comfortable that house is going to be in the winters? About the quality of the, or is that like an unfair extrapolation to make?
It's a little bit too extreme. So contractor hack back on. I feel like Bill Nye, like safety glasses off. But so my in-laws house, I'll use it as an example. So it's an all electric home. They built it in 2008. I blower door tested it. It was like an 1100 blower door. I screwed around with that house for hours and got it to 995. And I'm like, well, this is stupid. I just spent 5 hours trying to get 100 points out. This is not worth my time. And my mother-in-law's like, what are you doing? It's easy to annoy her anyway, but I definitely annoyed her with that. But their house has a single stage heat pump. And then oddly enough, they have a wood boiler that runs through as well. But because it's a single stage piece of equipment, while the temperatures are pretty much dead even throughout the entire house because it's tight and well insulated, the surfaces aren't super warm. So sometimes the house feels a little bit cold, even though everything's dead even. Like you walk through and there's no temperature differences anywhere in the house. That's the mark of a good shell. But the mark of good HVAC is that everything feels warm, because it's circulating all the time and you're mixing the house like a vinaigrette and you're blowing a little bit of heat and a little bit of cool against all the surfaces and the materials of the house. And so everything just feels warm because now the windows aren't super cold anymore. The walls aren't radiating cold anymore. So energy use is definitely a piece of it. And like, if you see low energy use, the odds are it's going to be better. I mean, if nothing else, their house is tight and doesn't use a ton of energy. So you can see that, and their HVAC's 12 years old now. So they barely use it, but under normal circumstances, it would be nearing time of replacement. And so you could see that, be like, okay, we can replace the equipment and it'll be okay. But to answer your question directly, low energy use doesn't necessarily mean comfort, but it's good odds, kind of like a square is a rectangle, but a rectangle is not a square. They're kind of closely related. So if you see low energy use, it's like a rectangle. It's like, well, it might be a square, but I don't know for sure until we look at the house more deeply.
Got it. Okay, so let's move on to the next level, at the federal level. I mean, we'll preface this by saying that there's, again, as a reminder, there's a whole bunch of actions that the federal government can take, is taking, could be taking, should be taking. We're just spitballing here on a couple of themes around not getting in, not creating too much friction at the kitchen table. So that's where we began this journey, and we're zooming out from there, right? And so, but in the next season, we'll talk about, maybe we'll even sit down and look at specific actions that my federal government here in Canada is taking, your federal government in the United States is taking, and piece them out. But for now, sticking to that church at the kitchen table stuff, Nate, what are some recommendations you would make for federal policymakers at that scale?
Yeah. So again, this is try and keep the 1000x thing in mind, or limit what the cost could be. So the rule of thumb that as a policymaker I want to keep in mind here is, in general, when you get beyond incentives that drive 1% of market penetration, they tend to get too expensive to continue, and you take them away and you just created a belt cliff. So how do we avoid the belt cliff? So what we just talked about publishing energy use at resale, and that is, I should say, I recognize that it's a messy subject because there's a lot of things that vary. I've seen the data. It is scattered. It is all over the freaking map. But data is scattered in so many things of our lives. And like, insurance companies have to look at insanely scattered data and decide what are they going to charge, and know that sometimes they're going to take it on the chin for one claim, but then in general, people aren't going to have a claim against that thing. So we're dealing with scattered data, but it's real data, and banks actually accept real data. Funny example, imagine going to the bank with a deposit slip that says a lot on it. Will they put that in? No. Banks want real hard numbers, just as contractors, want real hard numbers to make money. So anyway, so as a federal policymaker, we now have potential to change the entire supply chain wholesale all at once that we do not have at the state or the local level. So I am going to touch on a specific policy proposal because it's important here. So I suggested that the feds pay the HVAC manufacturers to stop making air conditioners and only make heat pumps. It's the same piece of equipment. It just has a few extra parts so it can run backwards. But fundamentally, it's the same piece of equipment. Like we said earlier, it's like a car that has a reverse gear versus a car that doesn't have a reverse gear, and everything else is the same. It's not a massive difference. So we think of decarbonization as two clocks. So the first clock is how quickly can we get to 100% replacement using heat pumps, whatever that looks like, or with an electric replacement, whatever that might look like. But for heating and space heating, it's heat pumps that we're looking at. That's the technology we're working with broadly. So if we could pay for the cost difference, which isn't substantial, we're talking hundreds of dollars, not thousands of dollars, that could shift everything. And the cost of that is capped by how many get replaced every year. So there's a limit to how much it can cost, because there's 3 million heat pumps and 5 million air conditioners and 3 million furnaces in general sold in the United States every year. So could that number go up by 20 or 40%? Yeah, probably. But it's probably not going to triple. So you have an idea of what something's going to cost. So at that 1000x scale, you would be going out and designing for 1000x now, rather than putting a small stepping stone policy in place and then waiting to see if you can 1000x it. So the feds have this unique opportunity that they could do that, because until we stop that first clock where every single new piece of equipment has a heat pump in it or is electric, even if it's a hybrid. So in this case, this policy proposal is to create hybrids. So it's a heat pump on top of a furnace. But at least there is an electric option that's being put out every time. And that stops that first clock. And once you stop the first clock, then you're just waiting out the replacement. So like cars on average last about 15 years. HVAC systems on average last about 15 years. So if you get to where you're doing 100% replacement with an electric option, it's going to take 15 years to work through stock. And can you speed it up some? Yes, but it's really expensive. I mean, like the roof on our house in Ohio needs to be replaced. Do I want to replace that this year or next year? Next year, so I can conserve cash. And maybe I can take a vacation with that money instead, or whatever it might be. So getting people to take a very expensive purchase and move it up is very expensive to get them to do, because it goes against all of our incentives. So realistically, I don't think we can expect to drop that replacement cycle more than a year or two overall. Like I don't think there's any way we're going to go 100% EVs by 2030 or 100%.
I mean, but that's
replacements.
I mean, that's still, that's a bridge you can cross later, perhaps, right? And
Yeah.
It's also, you don't want perfect to be the enemy of the good and so on. So
correct.
So still a 15-year trajectory over which you are, switching out. Basically, what you're suggesting is you're not going to manufacture just ACs anymore. You're going to be manufacturing two-way ACs, perhaps like electric.
Yeah, two-way ACs, which is a heat pump. Yeah. So the thing to think about on the federal level is, how do we stop the first clock of making it so everything that is installed is an electric option? How do we stop that as soon as humanly possible? Because then the second 15-year clock begins, and then we can just let the market work its way through everything that's out there. And so realistically, when we're talking cold climates, a solid half of houses, maybe more, maybe less, depending where we are, you can't just electrify them. You can't pull out a furnace and put in an air conditioner, or or put in a heat pump, because they will jump their utility costs so much that you're going to hurt them. So if we're going to talk about equity and LMI and that sort of thing, you can't do that. That's going to hurt people. So realistically, short term, we're looking at hybrids, which is a heat pump on top of a furnace. Do I like that? Well, today I don't have an electrify everything shirt on. I have a better HVAC shirt on, but I wear electrify everything shirts all the time. My agenda is pretty clear. That's what we're trying to do, but we also have to be realistic and pragmatic in how we get there. So as a federal, say, politician proposing legislation, whatever we can do to not screw up the kitchen table, which means we're talking either midstream, which is working with supply houses, or upstream, which is working with OEMs, and only feds can play upstream, really. One state can't stop the supply of HVAC across the whole country. There's just not going to happen. But if as a federal politician, I can do something that doesn't get in the way of the kitchen table transaction, but fundamentally replaces options that right now are burning entirely fossil fuels with options that either partly or entirely offset fossil fuels, and stop that first clock, that is a worthy goal in my mind. And frankly, the list of policies that doesn't screw up the kitchen table transaction is vanishingly short.
Vanishingly short, the higher you zoom out. Right. Yep. So from the kitchen table to the city to the federal level, that meet. So there's two. So on a Venn diagram of something that doesn't mess up the church of the kitchen table, but also something that can 1000x.
Yep.
It's just very, very
not limited. A lot of overlap. Yeah. So you're right. At the lower levels, cities have more things they can do because there's more trust, there's more community. It's viewed as much more grassroots than it is top down. And these things are all really important. But yeah, you want to think about, how do we stop that first clock as quickly as possible, mixed with can we 1000 exit? And shoot, I'm forgetting the third piece of the puzzle.
Church of the kitchen table without messing up.
Church of the kitchen table. Yes, exactly. So doing those three things simultaneously, there's not a lot of overlap in the middle. Like this is where we've come to view residential electrification like walking along the ridge of a mountain that's, say, 2 feet wide, and it's 500-foot drop offs on either side. So if you screw up, you die.
And there's dragons on one side and vampires on the other, right?
Yes. Maybe the vampires would let me become a vampire, so I'd probably go that way rather than the dragons. But but the path to actually successfully decarbonizing homes by 2050 is incredibly narrow and, frankly, incredibly unlikely if we aren't very, very careful. And so, kitchen table, being able to 1000X, and then just staying out of the way in general, are critical pieces.
Okay. On that cheerful note,
yeah, I'll leave it to me to be cheerful.
We will put a full stop on this season of Boundary Spanners. And when we come back next season, I would love to unpack, because I think in part, I mean, right now we're running this off the side of our desk, right? Like I'm clawing some time away from things I'm doing. You're clawing some time away from 1,000 things you're doing. And so we're using this to think through talking, and rather than hoard that knowledge between it's easy for you and I to just we could be doing this, just picking up the phone and talking to each other, but we're putting this out there because there's a lot of tacit knowledge that we both embody between the two of us, and we're exploring the boundary of that and then rendering it explicit.
Yeah.
When we come back next season, I'm really, in this episode, I think we've come up with a framework, which is like the three essential components, the Venn diagram of successfully scaling residential decarbonization. Is one is to something that doesn't add friction to the church of the kitchen table, a policy and programs that can kind of like 1000X can scale without falling off the bell cliff. What was the third piece? I'm blanking on it at the moment.
I know, me too. So that's terrible. So let's start creating policy. We've got 3 circles in our Venn diagram, but we only know what 2 of them are. We'll listen back to this and we'll post it on there. One other thing I'd like to encourage is to people that are listening to this. And I'm sorry that my last statement there was not exactly the sunniest one, but I try to be frank at the same time as well. This is one of the toughest challenges because it's so dispersed. Like in the US, there's 100,000 HVAC contractors, and on average they're going to have 3 or 4 people per company, and there's plenty out there that have 50 or 100 people per company. Each one of those people has to be convinced that this is a good idea in a way that they can then convince 100 million homeowners out there, it's probably at least 60 million decision makers, that this is a good idea. This is a land war. This is really hard.
And not only do they need to be convinced, but they need a framework around which they can wrap around a business model and practice in doing that in a certain way. The HVAC industry, residential HVAC servicing industry, hasn't really changed that much, right? No. In a long time. A lot of it is just like volumetric sales. You're selling the fastest product, quickest product, cheapest. Yeah. And you're making money off of that, make money off of doing service calls. And yes, you can play around the margins, you can charge more for certain things, you can have certain loss leaders, but the fundamental structure of HVAC industry hasn't changed that much.
No, I would argue probably not since about 1950.
Right.
So about 70 years, not to say that there haven't been changes, but with 85% of equipment being single stage, that's essentially the same thing. It's a little bit more efficient. It's got some more the small features and things like that. The thermostats are marginally better, but it's not an order of magnitude better.
And you and I are not doomers, right? We're not gloomers. Like we're not gloom and doom. But we're also realistic about like the magnitude of the challenge ahead of us. So I think that just leaves us in the sort of the hopelessly optimistic category.
That would be about it. It's every day. Why am I doing this? But there's a path to the other side of this.
Mhm.
And to all of the policymakers listening to this and my policymaker friends, all I ask is please be gentle, don't get in the way. And if we're going to avoid the Bell Cliff, we're going to have to do this in a way that is market based. It just is. If people aren't just generally going to buy what is happening here, as soon as you remove the incentives, you create a Bell Cliff. And so that's a really, it's an incredibly difficult challenge, because again, now we have 100,000 contractors and 100 million homeowners that we have to individually convince this is a good idea, and then figure out the bespoke solution for their home, because no two will be exactly identical.
So let me give you a more difficult challenge, and I'll follow up with you on. I'll take the challenge on myself.
Okay.
What is your call to action as a policymaker? Put your policymaker hat on. What would you say to contractors?
Find a business model that makes this make more sense for you.
Okay.
And we'll help support you in whatever that might look like.
Got it.
That's a
Sounds
good
good to me.
question. Okay, well, there you go. So what as a contractor,
Mhm.
what would you say?
I would say that have the, I don't know if you understand my willingness and my capacity and my ability to take on decarbonization as a challenge. And I would like to find a better way for me to work with you so that you can understand what I'm good at and what I'm, and what my challenges are, what my opportunities are. So together, you can help craft the opportunity for me and show me that slice of the pie so I can go there and do what I'm good at doing.
I like that. That's one of the ways that I view it with my contractor hat on, is that ideally policy will supercharge whatever the change is that should happen. So the change is going to happen anyway if we set this up well. Again, path is narrow, but hopefully policy can be used to supercharge that and move us down that path without kicking us off.
There is enough work here for a lot more people like me as a contractor.
Yep.
Contractor. There's so much work to be done. And if you're telling me there's more opportunity coming down this road, then I am excited for it, as I'm sure the rest of my industry are. And if my industry is growing, if my own sons and daughters want to be a part of the industry that I, get so much value out of, that's a big win for me. Yeah. I will have to be honest with you though and tell you that in the past, when I've been a part of some programs, it hasn't really worked well. I mean, I've managed to survive. Some of my friends haven't, and it's hurt my business models a little bit. So I want us to be very careful about the next steps we take. But I'd like to. I want a good mental sparring partner of it, so that I can tell you exactly, here's what my business looks like.
Yeah.
Here's how I grow. Here's what my margins are, and I cannot take on 10 more contracts, and this is what it looks like. Now you tell me how I can, identify decarbonization. But then after the end of this, if you show me a piece of the pie, I'm there to take it, because I want to grow. I want to be good at what I do. But unless you understand what that piece looks like from my end, I don't think this is going to go far.
I like that. This is where contractors and policymakers, if they don't work together, hand in hand, understanding what the other one needs, we're going to be in trouble.
We already are in trouble, because that doesn't happen nearly as enough as it should.
Yeah. So as a policymaker, I need to stop in any way treating you, the contractor, as a child. Like I need to be the parent to your child. Well, they're not going to do this anyway. And instead meet each other adult to adult and explain and understand what the needs of each other are, and try and find a path forward.
And, as a contractor, I can tell you that I have, a lot of respect for individual policymakers, because I know they try, and I know that they care. but I don't know why. At the end of this, like, it's not like I feel. It's not like I feel like I'm being. It's not like I feel like they're being paternalistic or patronizing towards me. I just know that despite their best intentions, they design programs from afar, and they invite me to come participate in something rather than starting with me and then really investing their time and energy into thinking about what it is that I want and how it is that I can be a part of something like this. And if I had that support, then I'm excited about what might what could happen, I think, while also being nervous because this isn't the first rodeo.
Yeah, and we're trying to do something that's new.
Spanning
That's hard.
boundaries.
So
Anyways,
with that in mind,
mhm.
any questions that you have, kindly comment. Share these episodes if you have found them to be useful. But let us know what your questions are so that for the next season, we can work on tackling those in addition to the other things that we already have in mind.
Yeah, and in next season, we will dig more deeply into our own individual areas of expertise and weigh in on very specific. I'd like to take a tour of a different churches at the kitchen table, have maybe guests over like a contractor or homeowner talk about how that conversation happened at the church at the kitchen table. Maybe you and I, Nate, you and I can look at the different cities around your country and mine and see what programs do we really like or not like based on our own expertise. And then kind of I think there's value in just thinking through what is working, like what are cities doing now, or what are
the bright spots
at each of these scales. What should we stop doing? What should we start doing that we aren't doing, and what we should continue doing that is already working? And so we'll dig deeper into that. The season 1 is the sort of a long trailer, if you will. We're putting our cards out there. This is where we come from.
Introduction to decarb.
This is who we are, for better or for worse. These are our blind spots. These are our biases. These are our preferences. And we are willing to step outside of our comfort zone to try to sketch out what it might look like for us to think this together. And in next season, we'll get into more specifics of these, the three Venn diagrams, solving the problem at the intersection of those 3 Venn diagrams at different scales and what roles each people can play. I'm excited about it.
Me too. So this has been fun. So thanks for inviting me to do this, Abhi.
Thanks for having me, Nate, and thanks for spanning the boundaries of policy and programs and implementation and technology. And you're one of the good ones out there that's doing the real work. And I think we all learn a lot from you. I certainly have learned a lot from you. So it's been a pleasure.
Well, thank you. And right back at you.
Peace.